After my mom's engagement party, she dropped me off at my dad's house and told me she was leaving me behind. Now I'm navigating life with my grandparents and healing. My name is Sarah, and I am 19 years old. It was the night of my mom's engagement party, an evening I thought would be full of laughter and celebration. But instead, it turned into one of the most heart-wrenching moments of my life. After a long night of toasts and family greetings, my mom did something I never saw coming. She dropped me off at my dad's house, hugged me tightly, and then, with no warning, told me she was leaving me behind. "It's time for you to stay here with your dad," she said. I thought I misheard her at first. Surely, she didn't mean it that way. But the look on her face told me it was real. My mom, the woman who had been my constant, the one who had promised me she'd never leave, was gone. And there I was, standing in the middle of the mess she left behind. Growing up, I was always close to my mom. It wasn't just because she was my mother. It was because she was my rock, my support system. She was the one who stayed up late to help me with homework, who wiped away my tears when things went wrong, and who cheered the loudest at every school event. My dad and I had a strained relationship, not because he didn't love me, but because he was always distant. There was a lot of tension between him and my mom, and as a result, he wasn't around much. I didn't mind it, though. I had my mom, and that was all I needed. But when I was 14, everything changed. My mom and dad went through a messy divorce. My mom had told me it was for the best, that it would bring peace, but it didn't feel that way. I watched as my mom navigated a new life, while my dad remained a shadow of the man I had once known. My mom started dating again, and eventually, she met Carl, the man she would end up marrying. Carl wasn't awful, but he wasn't the man my mom needed either. He was distant and often acted as if I were an afterthought in her life, something that started to make me feel even more abandoned. After my mom started dating Carl, things started shifting in our household. I went from being the center of her world to just another face in the crowd. I could feel the change in her, the shift in her attention. It wasn't that she didn't love me. It was that she had other priorities now. She was consumed with her relationship, her new life, and I was somehow relegated to the backseat of her life. My relationship with my dad didn't improve, but I was left with no choice but to stay with him more often. I thought it would be temporary, just a weekend here or there, but over time, it became more permanent. My dad had always been there for me in his own way, but it wasn't the same as having my mom. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle that was missing several pieces. Then came the night of her engagement party. At the time, I didn't know how much it would change everything. It was supposed to be a celebration. Family gathered to toast her new life, her new beginning. But what I didn't know was that for my mom, that party marked the end of everything I had ever known. I wasn't prepared for the bombshell that would drop on me that night. It wasn't until the day after the engagement party that I realized something was terribly wrong. I had stayed the night at my dad's house, as usual, and in the morning, I woke up to an unusual silence. The house felt cold and empty, even though it was the weekend, and usually we would have some sort of interaction by then. Dad grumbling about his morning coffee, or me running into the kitchen to grab something before school. Today, it was different. There was no hum of the coffee machine or the sound of Dad's usual banter with the neighbors on the phone. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just my mood, or maybe I was overthinking things. But I couldn't shake the eerie feeling. As I wandered downstairs, a familiar knot twisted in my stomach. The house seemed darker than usual, though the sun was out. It felt almost as if the walls were closing in on me, each step leading me into more confusion. And then I saw it, the pile of unopened letters on the kitchen counter. It was strange to see so many letters just lying there untouched, but I barely had time to wonder why. The top one caught my attention immediately. It was from my mom, her handwriting, that looping, careful script that I had grown up seeing on every birthday card and school note. My heart skipped a beat, and without even thinking, I grabbed the envelope, tearing it open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. I could feel the weight of it in my hand, heavier than I expected, as if it carried something more than just words. Dear Sarah, I know this will be difficult for you to understand, but after much thought, I've realized it's time for me to move forward. Carl and I are going to start a new chapter in our lives, and I need you to start the next chapter with your father. I know this isn't easy, but I think you'll understand once the time comes. I love you, always have, but I have to do this for myself. Please know this isn't about you. It's about me. Love. Mom. I stared at the letter, my mind racing. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of joke. But my hands trembled as I reread the words again, my pulse racing with every letter, every line. The letter was so final, so dismissive. It wasn't just that she was leaving Carl behind. It was that she was leaving me behind. The person who had been her constant. The person she had promised would always matter to her. I wanted to scream, to tear the paper up and throw it in her face, but my body wouldn't let me. Instead, I stood there, feeling as if the floor had been pulled out from beneath me. I had been abandoned, left behind like I was just another casualty of her life choices. For years, I had seen her go through failed relationships, but I had always thought she would choose me over everything else. But now there it was in black and white. I was no longer a priority. As I stood there, my eyes brimming with tears, I heard the front door creak open. It was Dad. He stepped inside, his face a little more tired than usual, as if he had been running errands all day. His shoes made a soft thud on the wooden floor, but his presence only made the silence more suffocating. "Sarah, what are you doing up so early?" he asked, his voice light, but there was something off about it. I barely registered his question. Without thinking, I blurted out, "She's leaving me, Dad. She's really leaving me. She left me a letter, and it says I'm supposed to stay here with you now." He froze. The air between us suddenly became thick, like I had just thrown a bomb into the room. He stood there, his expression unreadable, his eyes flicking from the letter in my hand to my face. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He didn't know how to react. I wasn't sure if he was afraid to say something wrong, or if he simply didn't know what to say. "Sarah, he trailed off, his voice barely a whisper as he rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't know she'd do this. I didn't think she'd leave you behind like this." The words didn't bring me comfort. I wanted to hear something that would make the pain go away, but nothing he said seemed to reach me. It was like his words were bouncing off a wall that I had built between us in that moment. How could she do this, Dad? How could she just drop me off here like I don't matter? She was supposed to be the one who would always be there for me. And now I'm just a burden to her. The anger, the hurt, all of it exploded in a way I wasn't prepared for. I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I don't even understand, Dad. I don't know what I did wrong. I thought I was important to her. But I guess I was just part of her past. She doesn't need me anymore." He sighed deeply, looking older in that moment than I had ever seen him. "I don't know what to say, sweetheart. I really don't. But I'll be here. I've always been here for you, and I always will be." But his words didn't fill the hole in my chest. The truth was too raw, too painful to ignore. My mom had chosen her new life over me. I was no longer her priority. I had never felt more alone in my life. That night, as I sat in my room, the letter from my mom still clutched in my hand, the reality of the situation settled in. I had no idea where my mom had gone or when I'd see her again. All I knew was that she was gone, and I was left with my dad, someone I barely knew, and someone who felt as lost as I was. I thought about calling her, begging her to come back, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. There were no words left. All I had was the emptiness, the pain of her absence, and the cold realization that I had been forgotten. The next few days were a blur. I didn't know how to process everything. My mom's departure felt like a sick joke, one that had been played on me for far too long. Every time I looked at the letter, it was like a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a phase. Maybe she was just going through something, and I would wake up to a text or a phone call, telling me everything was fine. But that never happened. The weeks passed, and I adjusted to my new reality. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fair. Dad and I had our awkward moments. He wasn't used to having me around all the time. But I appreciated his efforts. He made me breakfast every morning, something my mom had never really done, and we started talking more. Still, there was this strange tension. Something unspoken between us that we both felt, but didn't know how to address. Then, one day, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was spam, but something in my gut told me it was something important. Hesitant but curious, I opened it. The message was short, a single sentence that made my stomach turn. "Your mom has been in touch. She wants to talk." I didn't know what to think. Was this a prank? Was she really reaching out after all this time? My heart skipped a beat as I stood frozen in the middle of my bedroom. I showed the message to Dad, who frowned, confusion spreading across his face. "Do you think it's really her?" I asked, my voice uncertain. "I don't know. We haven't heard from her in weeks," he said, rubbing his chin. "But if it is, maybe it's time to confront all of this. It's not good for you to keep holding on to the hurt. It'll tear you up." I didn't know if I was ready for that. After all, my mom had left me behind without a second thought. How could I ever trust her again? But there was a part of me that wanted answers. I wanted to understand why she had done it, why I had been abandoned so easily. "Do you think she's sorry for what she did?" I asked Dad, my voice quieter this time. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were distant, like he was reliving something painful in his own mind. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know, Sarah, but maybe it's time to find out." I wasn't sure how I felt about seeing her again. Part of me was terrified that I would be rejected once more, that her apology wouldn't be genuine. But another part of me was desperate for closure, desperate for any explanation that would make sense of the hole she had left in my life. That evening, I decided to respond. My fingers hovered over my phone's screen as I typed. "Why now? Why after all this time?" I sent the message, almost immediately regretting it. I had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. The response came in minutes. "I've made some mistakes, Sarah. I know that now. But I want to make things right. Please let me explain." I stared at the message, unsure how to react. I had imagined this moment so many times, what I would say, what I would feel, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. My mom had always been so distant, so consumed by her own needs. I had always been the one left behind, trying to pick up the pieces of a broken relationship. I showed Dad the message, but he didn't give me any advice. He didn't know what I should do either. It was up to me to decide whether I was willing to take that step. "I'm scared, Dad," I confessed. "What if she leaves me again? What if she's just playing me like before?" "I can't tell you what to do, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "But I know you're stronger than you think. Whatever happens, I'm here for you. Always. The next day, I met my mom at a cafe near her apartment. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and the idea of facing her in person made my palms sweat. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, her once vibrant face now worn and tired. She was still beautiful, but there was something hollow about her presence. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to scream, to ask her why she had abandoned me, why she had chosen Carl over me. But instead, I just stared at her, unsure what to say. "Mom," I said, finally finding my voice. "Why? Why did you leave me behind? What could have been so important that you couldn't even say goodbye? You just left." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to touch my hand. I flinched but didn't pull away. "I was selfish," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought I was making the right choice. But I see now how wrong I was. I never should have left you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unfinished. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel that spark of hope that she truly cared, that she truly regretted her actions. But it wasn't that simple. There was too much damage, too much pain that she had caused. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I hope we can find a way back to each other, even if it takes time." For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be repaired. But I also knew that healing would take time. And in the back of my mind, a part of me wondered if it would ever truly be the same again. The days following that meeting were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. My mom's apology wasn't something I could just accept and move on from. It wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. The years of pain, the feeling of abandonment, all of that still lingered in my heart. I spent the next few days wrestling with myself, replaying every word of our conversation. Could I really rebuild what we had? Or was it all just a mirage, her words empty, her apology hollow? Dad noticed the change in me. I wasn't as distant anymore, but I wasn't entirely present either. I spent most of my time lost in thought, staring out of the window and contemplating the past. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, wondering if it was her again. I didn't know if I was ready for that, but the curiosity tugged at me, urging me to take another step toward understanding the woman who had once been my mother. One evening, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether to call her. My finger hovered over her name in my contacts, and I almost called it off. But then, something inside me shifted. I realized that if I didn't try to move forward, I would remain trapped in the past, locked in this never-ending cycle of resentment. I had to break free, even if it meant facing the painful truth. I dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Sarah?" Her voice was soft, almost tentative, as if she feared rejection. And maybe I would have rejected her. Maybe I should have. But the thing was, I still wanted a mother. I wanted someone who would love me unconditionally, who would help me navigate this confusing, chaotic life. I wanted the family I had lost. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice shaky, betraying the uncertainty I felt inside. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. Then, I heard her breathe a sigh of relief. "You don't have to forgive me right away, Sarah. But I'm so glad you're willing to talk." The next few weeks were awkward. We started slow, small talk at first, nothing too deep. Every conversation felt like testing the waters, both of us unsure where to start. But as time went on, I began to realize that while we couldn't erase the past, maybe we could try to rebuild something new. It wouldn't be the same as before. I couldn't just forget everything, but there was a part of me that wanted to give her a chance. I wasn't sure if it would work out, but I was willing to try. In the meantime, I spent more time with my grandparents. They had become my anchor, my safe place in the chaos that had consumed my life. Grandma was always there to listen to me, her wisdom grounding me whenever I felt lost. Grandpa, too, had his own way of making me laugh, even when I didn't feel like it. Their presence in my life became more than just a substitute for my parents. It was a bond, one that helped me heal, even if it wasn't the perfect solution. One afternoon, I invited my mom to come over for a coffee at my grandparents' house. It felt like a big step, something I hadn't done in years. The last time I saw her in this house was when I was a little girl, sitting on the porch steps, waiting for her to come pick me up. She had never come. And now, here I was, inviting her back into my life, trying to build something from the rubble she left behind. She came, looking nervous but determined. We sat on the porch, much like we had all those years ago, but this time, the air was different. It was filled with uncertainty, yes, but also a sense of possibility. We sipped our coffee in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, I spoke up. "Mom," I said, my voice steady but quiet, "I don't know what's going to happen between us. But I'm not going to shut you out completely. I need time, and I need to see that you mean what you say." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand, Sarah. And I'm not going anywhere this time. I promise. Whatever it takes." It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It wasn't some magical moment where everything was fixed in an instant. But it was a start, and that was enough for me. As weeks turned into months, our relationship slowly began to rebuild. It wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements, our awkward silences, but we were both trying. My mom would call me every week, sometimes more, just to check in and ask how I was doing. And slowly, I started to let myself trust her again. The walls I had built around my heart didn't crumble overnight, but little by little, they began to crack. It took time, and it wasn't easy, but I began to understand that healing doesn't always mean erasing the past. Sometimes it means learning to live with it, accepting the imperfections, and finding a way to move forward. One day, my mom and I were sitting in my living room, laughing over a stupid movie. It felt almost normal, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Not the naive, childish kind of hope, but the kind that comes with understanding that life doesn't always turn out the way we expect. It can be messy, painful, and unfair, but it can also be full of second chances. And maybe, just maybe, we were getting ours. The road ahead still had its challenges. The memories of my mom's abandonment were not something I could erase, nor was it something I would ever completely forgive. But as I sat there, laughing with her, something in me started to heal. I didn't need to be the same person I was before she left. I didn't need to go back to what we had. But I could choose to move forward with her, at my own pace, on my own terms. And I could choose to be grateful for the people who had never abandoned me, my grandparents, who loved me through it all, and my own strength, which had carried me through the darkest of times. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't predictable. But it was possible. So, as I sat there, with my mom beside me, I finally understood that I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to keep going. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, and share your thoughts in the comments.